Hello everybody, and welcome back to another video. In today's video, I will be taking you all through what I believe to be the best possible scenario for the Democratic Party in the upcoming 2026 midterm elections. This is assuming everything goes right for them, they win all the competitive seats, and what overall a big blue wave in the year 2026 would look like. Because I want to actually give a certain level of analysis, I've divided this up into two sections, part two coming out either tomorrow or on Wednesday. So let's get into it. And we're going to start by looking at the last time there was a blue wave at the House level. Again, we're talking about the House today. And it was 2018. And this was the last time the Democratic Party had a net, had a net gain in House seats and carried the chamber. In 2024, they had a net gain in House seats as well, but they did not carry the chamber. And so as you can see, Democrats won the popular vote by around 8.5%. They got nearly 10 million more votes than Republican candidates did, and they were able to gain a net of 41 seats. And so this was a pretty substantial victory for them. They had a pretty good night just across the board. There were a couple of seats that they, that maybe they could have won that they didn't quite get it done in, but broadly they won the majority of the competitive toss-up-esque seats. And at least, on the House level, it was a very good night for the Democratic Party. And now we're going to look at the 2024 map, which was very close. Democrats were 3 seats away from the majority. They still basically are. And to win back the majority, that means they only have to, net 3 seats. So to win the House for them, it's not necessarily a tall task. In fact, it's actually an easier task than the Republicans were faced with in 2022, which that was still a pretty easy task. Now, that being said, it's important that we make a few characterizations before we talk specifically about what the map would look like at the seat level. First of all, there are 2 potential redraws in the works, Ohio and Texas. Now, both of these redraws are not guaranteed, but what they might do is, both these states, which are controlled by Republicans, might look at their congressional maps and draw them more aggressively in favor of Republicans. They will attempt to create a map that is better for the GOP that could net them maybe 2 or 3 seats in the upcoming 2026 elections. And I think it's possible it happens, but it's very complicated and it's very hard to guess what the map is because, again, these are, states with like trillions of possible configurations, and I'm not exaggerating. Like, just look at a precinct map of Texas or Ohio and you'll see these are populated states where you can draw like so many different combinations of districts. There are certain rules still, but nonetheless. And overall, it's a process that's complicated. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to assume that these states do not get redrawn because that's part of the best case scenario for Democrats, right? Democrats hope these maps stay as they are and that they don't get any worse for the Democratic Party. So that's going to be factored in as the best case scenario. With that being said, let's get into it. So I've cooked up this map. This is I've spent the time looking at all these House districts, and I've rated 245 as being Democratic, 189 as being Republican, and one special case, which we'll talk about later in the video. This is what I'm saying is the best possible scenario for the Democratic Party in 2026. It's they win all the competitive seats and they have a really good national environment and basically everything goes right. Again, the seats that are dark are seats that are holding currently, and the seats that are lighter are the seats that are flipping. So just to keep it simple, I didn't rate them by safe, likely, lean, tilt. It's just dark seats are seats that you already hold, and lighter seats, in the case the Democrats, are seats are picking up. And obviously, since it's the best case scenario for them, I don't think that I'm going to predict the GOP picks up any seats because, again, there's no redraws, and most Democratic incumbents are at least competitive. So let's start. I can't talk about all these seats in one video, but I think it's important to kind of look at some regions. So we'll start in the Northeast, and by Northeast, I don't really mean New England because there's nothing really going on there in terms of flips, but I'm talking about New Jersey, Pennsylvania, New York. New York Democrats had a pretty good 2024. The only seat that they lost that they could have really won was with Mondaire Jones in the 17th district against Mike Lawler, who might run for governor. Might not, now that Elise Stefanik is running. She's the representative from this district. Lawler's a good incumbent. I think if he runs again, he's a clear favorite. He's still beatable. But again, in the best case scenario for New York Democrats, I think Lawler runs for governor, the seat's open, and then they flip it back. This seat did vote for Kamala Harris, so it's definitely competitive, but there's a number of things that are going to have to go right for the party. Let's go to Pennsylvania now. I have them winning 3 seats here in this scenario, or actually flipping 4 seats here, and I think, some of these are pretty self-explanatory, right? Like Scott Perry and Ryan McKenzie both won by 1% in 2024. So these are obviously competitive from the get-go. Robert Bresnahan, he won by 2% or a little less than that in 2024. So he's also competitive. The one you might be wondering about is the first district, which is actually a Kamala Harris one district. So that's good for Democrats. But of course, Brian Fitzpatrick is the GOP incumbent here, and Brian Fitzpatrick has consistently done very well. Fitzpatrick won by 12% in 2024, so he's a good incumbent. But the only thing that's interesting here is that he recently voted against Trump's big, beautiful bill, which has caused some Republicans to kind of turn their eyes at him and say, hey, look, why'd you do that? I think the reason is pretty simple. Fitzpatrick's in a Democratic-leaning district. It's not, deep blue. It's not like he represents downtown Philadelphia, but he represents a suburban area that's, voted for Hillary Clinton, voted for Joe Biden, still voted for Kamala Harris, despite the fact that Trump flipped the state as a whole. So overall, what I would say is that the Democrats' best hopes of winning the seat come in the form of a primary challenge to Fitzpatrick. And Republicans, that might be in the works. I think Republicans might indeed challenge him. And if he does get primary challenged and loses his primary, the seat immediately, I think Democrats are favored in. But again, not my prediction. As I'm going to state multiple times throughout this video, it's just kind of the best case scenario for Democrats. The South isn't too exciting. I only have Democrats picking up 2 seats here in the South. And again, there's maybe a case to be made for adding on this district in Tennessee or North Carolina's 11th, but I still think that's a little bit too far, even on a really good night for Democrats. So we're just going to focus on Virginia for now. The easier lift for Democrats is beating Jen Kiggans. Democrats are hoping that Aaron Rouse runs, but even then, this is a seat that Trump won by less than 1%. Jen Kiggans outran him by 3. She's a solid incumbent. I think she's definitely one of the better GOP recruits. She won for the first time in 2022, so she's kind of a rising star within the Virginia GOP. Nonetheless, she's not a world beater, and Democrats nearly knocked her off in 2024 with a more unknown candidate. So overall, I would probably say that this seat is already a toss up, if not potentially on a good night for Democrats, they'd be winning it. Now, the more interesting one is District 1 with Rob Whitman. Now, this district again. It's interesting because Democrats have been kind of trending in the right direction here for the past few cycles, but they haven't really come close. In 2020, they were kind of competitive. I think they lost by 4 or 5, or I think they lost by 5 points in the old iteration of this district. But 2026 is interesting because Democrats think they're going to have a good year in Virginia. Between the cuts made to the federal government back during the Doge kind of part of the Trump presidency, it's a very interesting thing. Just overall to see how that'll affect the state as a whole. So on a really good night for Democrats, Whitman could lose. And again, he won by 12. He did fine in 2024, but Democrats did not fund, this candidate. Running against Whitman. Sorry about that. And so overall, we don't really know how Democrats are necessarily going to fare. Should they actually put in more effort to winning this district? So that's all I really have to say about seats in the South. The Midwest is the most important part, so we're going to kind of come back. Now we're going to go to kind of the Mountain West, I guess you could say. We're going to go Arizona through Montana. Well, actually, we're going to start in Colorado. Scratch that. Colorado, this is what probably stands out to you when you look at this map. Democrats winning every seat in Colorado. And it might sound crazy because Colorado is not it's not Massachusetts or it isn't like New England where Democrats consistently win every seat. It's not even like Oregon or Washington where it's, pretty consistently Democrats win by 15 to 20. It's getting there. But what I will say is that Democrats have a real chance, obviously, of holding all 4 of their seats, which are pretty safe, and then winning back these other 4. Now, I might make a video on this on its own because it's kind of interesting, but let me take you through it. So the first one is the 3rd district. This is interesting because this is a seat that was vacated by Lauren Boebert, who moved to the 4th district. But District 3, Democrats only lost it by 5. They didn't have a great year in 2024 nationally, right? The district was only 3.5% to the right of the country. So in a year where Democrats won the popular vote by 7 or 8 like they did in 2018, that's already a Democratic flip, just not adjusting for candidate quality or anything else. So I would definitely argue that this is in play for Democrats, especially if they have a good night. And then going over to the 8th district, Gabe Evans won by 0.8 of a percentage point against Idira Caraveo. Democrats have a number of candidates running here. I don't think it matters who they run. It'll be competitive no matter what. This is a seat that I think Trump won by 0.5 percentage point, or I think it might have actually voted for Kamala Harris. Either way, it was like a 0.4% margin of victory presidentially for Trump. I believe he won it, but it was very narrow. So that's definitely competitive. And then, so these two are definitely, I could see flipping no matter what. Now, interestingly, we do have 2 seats that are kind of tougher lifts. Now, in terms of partisanship, District 5 is a bit bluer, and it's actually more left trending than District 4, but District 5, Jeff Crank won by 14% in 2024. This is Colorado Springs. This is like it's an area that Democrats are gaining a lot of votes and it's gaining population. As you can see, it's actually kind of a small district geographically because it's more urban. So the Republicans have, really been losing a lot of ground here. And I think on a really, really good night for Democrats, the trends are just enough to get them like a super narrow victory. Kind of like what we saw, like if you go back to 2018, it's kind of like what we saw maybe in Utah or Oklahoma, where you have metro areas that are, moving towards Democrats in deep red areas historically, where Democrats can get like a super narrow victory on a really good night. I think that's kind of the equivalent of that in Colorado. And then finally, our last seat is the reddest one here. This is Boebert's seat, but she only won by 12 points in 2024, and she underperformed Trump by I think 10 or 11%. So she's really not that good of an incumbent. She carpetbagged from another district, so she's only been repping this area for 2 years, or it'll only be 2 years by 2026. She's never been a good performer. She nearly lost in 2022. So just overall, really, really interesting stuff. I guess I would say in Colorado. I'm not saying I think Democrats are going to pick up these seats. I think as of right now, they're actually only favored in one of these four. But if things get really bad for the GOP between now and Election Day 2026, yeah, Democrats could, in theory, win all 8 of these seats. Arizona, these are simpler. These are seats that Trump won by, I think, 1 or 2% each. Schweikert won by 4, Ciscomani won by 3. These are both seats that are pretty marginal in a wave you could expect them to flip. Montana District 1, a lot of it's candidate dependent for the Democratic Party. I think Montana is kind of interesting because they do like to split their ticket at times. This one's not really partisan. It's not too friendly to Democrats in terms of partisanship. I think Trump won this seat by nearly 10% last year, but Montana, if Democrats can field someone good to run against Ryan Zinke, it definitely could get closer. So that is going to be it for the Mountain West region. Now going to move to the West Coast. The West Coast Democrats had a pretty good 2024. They flipped a seat in Oregon. They flipped a couple districts in Southern California. They held on to Marie Gluesenkamp-Perez in Washington. So I'm only going to focus on a few seats in California. And no, I do not think even on a really good night, Democrats can beat Young Kim. So I'm keeping her red. But there are 3 seats I think they could pick up. We'll start in kind of the. It's a big district geographically. I don't like the way they drew it, but it kind of starts in the Sacramento suburbs and goes down the state. But not a lot of people live here. But this is Kevin Kiley's district. He won by 10% in 2024. He did a bit better than Trump. He's definitely a decent incumbent, but he's not been around. He's only been around for, I think, 2 cycles, so he's not entrenched. He's certainly less well known than someone like Young Kim. And Democrats in 2024 in California, they did have a good year. They were able to knock off an incumbent in the Central Valley, which is, somewhat similar to this district over here. But more interestingly, what you have is you had 2 GOP incumbents, Michelle Steele and Mike Garcia, who are quite popular, who are known to be kind of moderate. Maybe not Michelle Steele, but at least Mike Garcia, right? They had a moderate reputation, whether it's deserved or not, right? I get a lot of people, someone said that about Mike Lawler. I think I called Mike Lawler moderate. When I say moderate, I don't mean that I think they're moderate, because moderate is a very subjective thing, right? Someone that I think is moderate might be, very extreme to someone else, or, someone that I think is extreme might be very moderate to someone else. The point I'm making here is that the voters perceive them to be moderate, and that's my job to interpret. So, moderate congressmen from California who have done well in the past, they went down in 2024 to Democrats. So Kevin Kiley's definitely not immune. This is actually a district that's probably more left trending than the state as a whole, because the Sacramento suburbs have been moving towards Democrats in the past few elections. So I would say Kevin Kiley could lose on a really good night. And then David Valadao on a good night for Democrats could also go down. He won by 6% in 2024. Democrats have been trying to get him for the past few cycles. He's won in 2022 and 2024, but the margin by which he's outperformed the top of the ticket has decreased. His district's gotten a lot redder, which is helping him. But overall, I think his candidate quality's gotten a little bit worse compared to 2016 or 2020. And then finally, Democrats, I think their easiest lift in California is beating Ken Calvert. They only lost to him by, I think, 3.5 in 2024. And overall, this seat it moved to the left in 2020. I think it was pretty stagnant in 2024 relative to the country, maybe even a bit left trending. So that's definitely one that's on the board for Democrats. We're going to wrap it up in the Midwest. We'll start in Nebraska, which, if you disagree with my characterization of Nebraska being in the Midwest, I'm sorry. I don't mean to hurt any feelings. But Nebraska has 2 seats that could be interesting. And because I want to make this video fun, I did plug in an independent here in the 1st district. Now, who might that be? none other than Dan Osborne, who ran for Senate in 2024. He lost by 6% statewide. He actually did carry this district in his run. So overall, I would argue that Dan Osborne, if he were to run in this district, which some people have speculated he might, I think he'd be competitive, and I think he could potentially win as an independent. Again, he did well here in his Senate run. That could transfer to a House run. And then the more easy lift and straightforward lift for Democrats is beating Don Bacon, who's now retiring. He only won by 2% in 2024 anyway, so he could have gone down either way. But now that he's retired, Democrats, I think, are favored to flip the seat anyways. Let's go to, I think we'll do Missouri and Iowa now. These are all Trump districts, but they're kind of different. These two seats in Iowa were both pretty close in 2024. Zach Nunn and Mariannette Miller-Meeks both underperformed Trump pretty substantially. Again, Miller-Meeks is in a Trump plus, I think, 12 or 13 seat, and she nearly lost. She won by like 700 votes. Yeah, she won by like 800 votes, so she's not that great of an incumbent. Democrats can definitely beat her, and they're running the same candidate again. I think she's a little underrated right now in terms of her electability. I think a lot of people just assume she's going to lose because she only, she narrowly won in 2024. I think it's worth having a conversation about whether or not she's actually going to lose. But, in a good scenario for Democrats, she could absolutely go down. And then in Missouri, we've got Ann Wagner running for re-election. And again, this is a seat that's interesting because it's a little bit left trending. It's suburban St. Louis, but Democrats haven't really broken through here. They had a decent chance in 2020, and they didn't really come all that close. So it's just kind of worth throwing on the map, but this is definitely one of their harder targets anyways. And then we're going to go to Wisconsin and Michigan, going to go to the upper Great Lakes now. Democrats have a couple of opportunities to flip here. I think their best might actually be in the 7th District of Michigan, where Tom Barrett won in 2024, but only by 3% against a relatively weak Democratic nominee in Curtis Hurdle. And then also, I think it's Hertel. I think it's Curtis Hertel, actually, not Hurdle. But Democrats, I think they've got a decent bench here. And more importantly, this is a seat that, Democrats have held for, prior to 2024, of course, they held for a good amount of time. They did well here in 2022. Overall, I do believe the party can just flip it in a Democratic year, right? Like, this isn't a seat where it's like, oh, it's like the 2nd District of Missouri or like the 4th District of Colorado, where like Democrats need a really good wave to win it. This is a seat that's always marginal, and that Democrats have actually had a narrow edge in for the past few cycles. I think they can flip it back either way. And then, a more tough lift could be the 4th District, where Bill Huizenga might run for governor. That might leave the seat open. Then this is a Trump plus, I think, 6 or 7 seat. And Democrats could absolutely win that if they have a really good candidate, and maybe they do well at the top of the ticket in Michigan. But more importantly, I think to me the more interesting seat is in Wisconsin, which is the 3rd District, where Derek Van Orden won by 2% against Rebecca Cook in 2024. This is a Trump plus, I believe, 11 or 12 district, so he underperformed by quite a lot. Not a great incumbent. He didn't do that well in 2022 either. I would argue that he could lose no matter what, whether or not it's a great night for Democrats, just because Democrats did not, to be fair, they funded Rebecca Cook a little bit, but she didn't get nearly enough money given how competitive the race was. If Democrats spend a little more time here, and if the country gets even 2 or 3% bluer, let alone 8% bluer, Derek Van Orden could be losing re-election. So that is it for the upper Midwest. We're going to finally go to Ohio. I don't really want to say a lot about this because it might get redrawn anyways, but I've been looking at this district in the 10th district with this district in Southern Ohio, which is the 10th district. It's the Dayton area. It's a little bit of the, kind of like the region that's more exurban between Cincinnati and Dayton. It's like Biden did kind of well here. Kamala Harris kind of regressed. Democrats, this is, I think, the part of the state where Democrats have improved the most in the past decade. Obviously, Ohio has not been friendly to Democrats since the Obama era, but Democrats have improved here. This is one of the few bright spots for them. I put it on the map just for fun, kind of. Again, it's more left trending. Democrats did not really challenge Mike Turner, so overall, it's kind of worth just having on if like Sherrod Brown runs for governor, and if Democrats find a good candidate, and if the country as a whole shifts towards the party. Because, right, like Mike Turner against an underfunded Democrat won by 19, so his seat was 17.5% to the right of the country. Shift the country 8 or 9 points to the left, that margin's cut in half, and then you can overcome that potentially with a good performance at the top of the ticket by Sherrod Brown potentially running for governor or Senate, or if you have a good Democratic candidate. Not saying these things are likely, but it's one of those seats that, like, there's a really, really, really small chance that everything goes right and Democrats win it by like 0.3%. So that's what the map would look like. And this is interesting. This is an interesting scenario. It's not likely to happen. Like this isn't. I doubt this will ever be my prediction. Um, and it's just a fun exercise because it kind of shows you the ceiling. And I'm going to do the same thing for the GOP after I do part 2 of this for the Democratic Party. So don't worry. If you're a Republican who wants to see what your best map could look like, I will show it to you within the next few days. But yeah, like if there are any questions about any seats I didn't really address. Oh, one more is Alaska. Alaska assumes Mary Peltola runs. Again, this was a seat that Nick Begich, after ranked choice voting, won by a little under 2%. So definitely, definitely one that could be interesting. But if I'll be sure to check comments if you have any questions about a district, maybe one you live in or one you're interested in. I'll talk about it, and be on the lookout for the Senate and Governor's edition, which will be coming out shortly. So thanks for watching, and I'll see you next time.